Hello, friends. Welcome back to 1D10T Does Stuff, and I am the 1D10T in charge, Trevor Stewart 1308. And today we will be reading from Inflamed, Deep Medicine and the Anatomy of Injustice by Rupa, Marya, and Patel. And I say we'll be discussing it. More to the point, I will be discussing it at you. But of course, I welcome other people's addition to the discussions, of course. And hi, Just Me Crystal. Much love, much love. Thank you for being here. Today, let's start with, of course, the ad read. Ad read. Today's pre-rolls brought to you by the Hidden Leaf. Today's pre-rolls brought to you by the Hidden Leaf. Downtown Charlottesville, 105 West Main Street, above the bricks, Suite 200, in between Green Cauldron and Hamilton's. A great place to go with some great buds to get some great buds, bud. And the only thing better than their bud is their customer service. And they do have the lowest prices in town, according to my own personally highly biased research, by which I was incredibly high when I did my biased research. Don't forget to check the website for times and events. The website is thehiddenleafcville.com. That's thehiddenleafcville.com. Note of disclosure. This is, of course, going to be a pretty politically opinionated and oriented stream. Tuesdays usually are. We're discussing broadly racism and sexism in the medical institutions of the United States. And more specifically, we are discussing, we'll get into more specifically what we're discussing later, but broadly, that's what we're discussing. And I want to point out that all of our sponsors are businesses, therefore, they do not have any sorts of political opinions necessarily. Any opinions you hear herein belong to me, the expressor, and or the channel and label. However, not necessarily to any of our sponsors, including the Hidden Leaf, the Kush Gang, purveyor of fine edibles and drinkables, and Firehouse Craft Farm. So, yes, thank you for hearing me out there. Oh my, I forgot to put my makeup on this morning. Oh well. Just Me Crystal. Just Me Crystal had said, I'd said Happy Taco Tuesday. Just Me Crystal had said yes, but no taco. Oh, thank you, Crystal. And apparently no taco for Crystal yet today because of a miscalculation in mathematicals. Well, hopefully, though, that can change by the end of the day. Hopefully, something happens where you will be able to get a taco by the end of the day. Crystal says, I am blessed to be alive to see the day. You know? I am too, Crystal. Thank you. Alright, well, now that we've got this pre-roll started. Let's get into the fun, huh? Um, Now, like I said, generally what we discuss on Tuesdays is sexism and racism in the medical institutions of the United States. But more specifically, we are looking at not just the treatment of marginalized people, but also specifically at the treatment of black women. And what we are doing is we are reading a bunch of books to try and gain some perspective on how the medical institutions, the medical structures affect marginalized people and specifically black women. My working theory is that there is an actual clear and present danger to black women especially, but to all marginalized people who don't fit within very narrow European beauty standards, therefore health standards, and, being a man, uh, how everybody who is not that is facing a system, a set of systems and structures. Oh, geez. I just realized I forgot to bring my mic down. Hold on just a moment. That should be a little more clear. Hopefully, it no longer sounds like I'm trying to talk through a plastic bag, because I was trying to talk through a plastic bag. I forget mic position on Tuesdays. I forget to adjust mic position. Again, I'm gonna mute myself real quick and adjust mic position. There we go. That should help. So, a clear and present danger to black women specifically from the behavioral health structures in the United States, but also from other healthcare structures. That these systems are built to continue to not only marginalized people, but to continue to keep them in a role of subservience. Especially to the fact that they're not men and not white. Oh, I guess I also forgot to put content warning on my, let me fix that real quick. Sorry, guys. Alright, that should help a little. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, just so that people don't stumble up into this and go, oh, this is triggering. I mean, there are some people who should be triggered by this. They should be triggered into doing better. Namely, doctors and medical healthcare professionals, medical and healthcare professionals should be triggered into being better. But we'll see. So yeah, generally this is sort of generally and specifically what we're working on. But we are even more specifically, we are working on this book, Inflamed, Deep Medicine and the Anatomy of Injustice by Rupa, Marya, and Raj Patel. And this is one of those. Oh? Sorry, guys. I hear a baby Z at my door. Huh? Oh, okay. I'm right here. Okay. I heard a baby Z there, and I was gonna go check on him, but he's fine. Jen's there with him. I tell you, it's a little hard to keep streaming when I know he's outside the door, and I just kind of want to go play with him. But no, I'm gonna do what I consider to be my job. Anyway, sorry. I keep hearing him out there, and it's just so aw. So, yeah, this book, Inflamed, Deep Medicine and the Anatomy of Injustice by Rupa, Marya, and Raj Patel, is, it is drawing a parallel using analogy between the human body and the environment around us. The biome and the exposome. The biome being the environment within our body, the exposome being the environment outside of our body. And you know, specifically, they are looking at this through the lens of inflammation, and how that affects not only our bodies but what the analogy is in the environment around us, the analogous inflammation that damages the environment around us. But as well as doing that, this book draws a direct link between the two, saying that not only are these the two things similar and analogous, they are inexorably linked, and that inflammation in the environment means inflammation in the body. Even if not directly linked to it, it is, or not directly causal of it, it is linked. Now this book is not written like most textbooks that I have read. It is much more So cute. He's learning how to talk, too. He's just babbling. It's great. This book is a bit more esoteric. In its approach. And it's hard to explain what I mean by that, other than it is its approach is to use the abstractness of human thought to build a true perspective, a perspective that is true in the sense that it accurately reflects the world around it. That's a whole lot of words. So, yeah, this is not going to be necessarily fun or funny, but we're going to work our way through it anyway. I also would like to point out that much in the way that this book is connecting the biome and the exposome, all of the issues that affect marginalized people are interwoven with each other. The dehumanization, the microaggressions that we face on a daily basis weave into our emotional and physical health. And they weave into our ability to effectively play a role in society. These all weave into if we are even allowed to be part of society, if we're allowed to be human, if we're allowed to be just be. So, while we're looking at this sort of almost narrow portion of this much larger thing, while we look at that, what we're also looking at is how it weaves into all of the surrounding problems, the systemic antiness, the systemic anti-black, anti, trans, non-binary, anti-homosexual, anti-woman, all of that. All of these sort of anti-people, anti-equality ideas all fold into this, can all be looked at through a lens of any one of them because they all fold into this much larger systemic problem. And, shorthand for this systemic problem is white supremacy and late stage capitalism. That's sort of the verbal shorthand that we're using for these problems. These institutional level, these systemic level problems. Not to say that there aren't also individual cases of these problems, but those individual, you can't deal with those individual cases without dealing with the larger issue first. Once you deal with these sort of systemic problems, the system-wide versions of sexism and racism, the individual versions will not just begin to lessen, but become much less attractive to the people who use them. So even if these people are still feel a certain way in their hearts, they won't be performing that. And I don't know if I've said this before, but I don't like to, pardon me, I don't like to claim to know what's in another person's heart, even though I usually do. I believe that while I'm not a moral absolutist, I think that Kant was Kant. I think Kant was a I'm gonna start, by the way, trying to use phallic word replacements for negative ideas, and try and get out of the habit of using using female parts or female references to mean bad things. So Kant was a prick, and not even a very big one. He was a peck. Small, hairy peck. Yeah, the whole idea of moral absolutism is... But also, someone's intentions don't really matter. What matter is what they do. And if you do the wrong thing for the right reasons, the outcome is still wrong. If you do the right thing for the wrong reasons, the outcome is still right. It's just that the individual doing it is still going about it, you know. Anyway. I don't believe in moral absolutism, but I do believe that the only way to judge someone is by judging their actions. What have they shown you that they believe? What have they done to make you believe their words? So people who perform racism and sexism may or may not be racist or sexist in their heart, but their continued behavior shows you that no matter what they believe in their heart, they at least feel comfortable continuing to remove somebody's equality. Crud. I don't remember how all this ties back into what I was saying about the book. Oh well. That's okay. I don't have to remember. I need to remind myself occasionally I am not a video essayist. I am an anchor. I am an anchor person. I am an entertainer and comedian trying to teach people is actually exceptionally outside of my wheelhouse. If people manage to learn through what I am doing, then that is wonderful. But I'm not here to teach. I'm here to learn. I'm as much here to learn as anybody else. Maybe more so. Part of why you don't hear me calling myself Professor Stewart 1308 or, Teacher 1308. No, I'm here as a student. And that's why we call our friend D. Angela Professor Sprout. She has, and I'm sure she's also out in the world to learn, but she's had a lot more experience with this, both firsthand and educationally, from an academic perspective. So as such, she, I felt like she was a good person to go to ask for this kind of curriculum. Sorry, I couldn't tell if my camera is level. Well, I guess that's about all of the introduction that I've got for you, because I am stumbling through this just as much as anybody else. Like I said, not an educator. I do dispense wisdom on a regular basis, but not really in an educational way. All right. So, here we go. Now, we are in the section connective tissue. And I'm not sure exactly how to talk about this section. There's definitely some environmentalism, slash, climate change, investigation here. So, right. Is that enough light on the page that y'all can see? Let me see if I can get this light over here a little bit more. There we go. My cameras both have, light correction stuff going on. So it doesn't really matter if I get enough light on something. Like, it'll get to enough light and then just a tiny bit too much, and the light correction software will just turn it down, and it's like, not helpful, guys, not helpful. The ethnomusicologist Martin Stokes explains that music provides... You know what? I'm going to jump back an entire paragraph first. I'm sorry, I forgot to do that. I know I usually do that. Note that the border between ecosystems is a living, moving boundary, not a wall. Oh, that they were talking about skin there and boundaries. A moving boundary, not a wall. As any first grade science book makes clear, the definition of life includes the phenomenon of movement. In motion, the species find new relationships to the earth, to water, and to each other, generating new possibilities of expression. These changes, these forces of life and movement, are rooted in biology. Unlike race, a fixed and rigid fiction whose only purpose is to enforce a social order supporting the agendas of colonialism. The ethnomusicologist Martin Stokes explains that music provides means by which people recognize identities and places, and the boundaries that separate them. Music can be a tool for people in diaspora to negotiate their identities, occupying and moving between several cultures and spaces at once. One of the best examples is jazz. The origins of jazz are subject to debate, but the conventional telling of the story, jazz was created in the 1880s in New Orleans. Others believe it's not that old, while composer Sun Ra says it was created billions of years ago. What historians do agree on is that jazz is a music of intermingling and improvisation, a mixture of African musical influences played on African and European instruments. The European-American pianist Dave Brubeck once described jazz as an improvised musical expression of European harmony and African rhythms. New Orleans in the mid-1800s was a confluence of worlds, exemplified by the unique culture of Congo Square, just outside the French Quarter, where West African, North American, and European influences harmonized to create an ecotone of languages including Wolof, French, English, Choctaw, German, and Spanish. The, the indigenous the indigenous Choctaw name for the place, now called New Orleans, is Bulbanka, translated to the place of many tongues. Bulbancha, the place of many tongues. Even before European colonists arrived, the area attracted linguistic diversity. In the alluvial fan, where the largest watershed in the continent empties into the Gulf, over 40 distinct indigenous tribes would gather, trade, and intermingle. Congo Square has been a cultural transitional zone for several centuries. It remains a sacred site of indigenous humanist people, Helmans people, who used to celebrate their annual corn harvest there. After the arrival of colonialism, the space became a market where indigenous and black people would trade goods they had grown, hunted, and foraged. As such, it became an important site of cultural economic resistance for enslaved black people. Jazz is a black art form that grew out of the pressure cooker reality of segregated slavery and then Jim Crow in the South. I don't feel like that is a controversial historical statement to make. And I wonder how many people actually are aware of that. That's something I feel like I've had a pretty solid awareness of for a very long time. I wonder. Yeah, I wonder if it's a common yeah. I wonder if it's common, sort of a common knowledge sort of thing. Jazz is a black art form that grew out of the pressure cooker reality of segregated slavery and then Jim Crow in the South. Long before the birth of jazz, Africans Enslaved Africans used musical instruments from Africa and Europe as weapons to push back against the oppression of racist colonial structure. In 1675 in Barbados, enslaved Africans intended trumpets to signal a revolt and would beat drums, blow shells, or use any other loud instruments. As means to communicate with their fellow revolutionaries. The music of enslaved Africans, like women's speech and indigenous forms of storytelling, was often a threat to the social order. The one place in the entire antebellum South where enslaved people were allowed to have their drums, congregate, at least for several uninterrupted years, was Congo Square, where on Sunday afternoons dance parties emerged with the drumming. The physical space for gathering in this manner was a critical ingredient for the emergence of the revolutionary ecotone of jazz. As the New Orleans born jazz composer and educator Wynton Marsalis proclaimed, the genealogy of all important modern American music can be traced to Congo Square. The scene was described by the music historian Ted Gioia. I'm sure I'm doing that wrong. An elderly black man sits astride a large cylindrical drum. Using his fingers and the edge of his hand, he jabs repeatedly at the drum head, which is around a foot in diameter and probably made from an animal skin, evoking throbbing pulsation with rapid, sharp strokes. A second drummer, holding his instrument between his knees, joins in, playing with the same staccato attack. A third man, seated on the ground, plucks at a string instrument, the body of which is roughly fashioned from a calabash. Another calabash has been made into a drum, and a woman beats it with two short sticks. One voice, then other voices join in. A dance of seeming contradictions accompanies this musical give and take. A moving hieroglyph that appears on the one hand informal and spontaneous, yet, on closer inspection, ritualized and precise. It is a dance of massive proportions. A dense crowd of dark bodies forms into circular groups, perhaps 500 or 600 individuals moving in time to the pulsations of the music. Some swaying gently, others aggressively stomping their feet. A number of women in the group begin chanting. One important distinction between jazz and European classical music is the former's participatory nature, which is epitomized by New Orleans' second line, a crowd of people accompanying the band in a parade of dancing, and what the jazz historian Bruce Rayburn described simply as fun. Contrasted with the separation between audience and performer that is characteristic of European music. Jazz invited a blurring of boundaries, an emotional expression and release for both musicians and audience. These fluid sounds invited mixing in a society that was otherwise strictly segregated according to the color of people's skin. The subversive impact of this new form has been said to subvert racial segregation, musically enacting an assault on white purity. The music was said to have encouraged racial boundary crossing by creating racially mixed spaces and racially impure music, both of which altered the racial identities of musicians and listeners. Upending the political boundaries of identity is part of evolutionary and liberatory force of jazz. Marsalis wrote, the fact that slaves could play the drums in New Orleans at Congo Square when they weren't permitted in other parts of the South allowed the drums to become a centerpiece of the style. Now the drums, while rooted in Africa, is Afro-American, which is American. To be Afro-American is also to be part Anglo-American. That is at the root of many of the problems related to race in America. It's hard for us to come to grips with that as a nation. We've been conditioned into making a false binary choice, an either or. An either or, when life isn't that cut and dried. Oftentimes it's both and. But it's hard for us to reconcile that both and when we are so used to having to choose sides. Just as birds of the savanna ecotone fly back to the African rainforests, bringing newly adapted traits, jazz was brought back to Africa and served as an important aspect of the freedom fighters' language against white minority rule in apartheid South Africa. The jazz legends Hugh Masekela and Miriam Makeba transmitted the sounds of resistance to racial oppression through their songs. And those subversive sounds of South African jazz became important drops in the mighty river that would end apartheid. For historian Gioia, not just jazz, but the entire history of music can be told as a 4,000 plus year old story of resistance, upheaval, and change, brought through the songs of those pushed to society's margins. To the composer and bassist Marcus Shelby, Black American music has the liberatory force which is grounded in the spirituals, work songs, field shouts, and blues hollers of the slavery-era South. These sounds encoded information for the resistance and showed hope of freedom. Early blues ballads, jazz, rock and roll, soul music, hip-hop, rap, R&B, funk. These are all just really beautiful fruits hanging on the same tree. The DNA that runs through all American music is authentically, at the roots, Black American music. Even the word jazz is undergoing its own evolution as contemporary Black artists look at it with a critical eye into how legacies of white supremacy have confined and defined their art forms within an industry dominated by Eurocentrism. The trumpeter Nicholas Payton outlines the contradictions carried in the name. To speak of jazz tradition is like to speak of racial justice. It's not possible to have justice within the confines of race because race was specifically designed to subjugate certain people to an underclass so that the majority thrives. Injustice is inherently built within the racial construct. There has never been any tradition within jazz other than to ensure Black cultural expression is depreciated and undervalued. I want to think about this for a second. The very act of putting a name on this art form gave people the ability to diminish it to whatever their boundary terms of definition were. By naming it jazz, you could say it is this thing, and only this thing is allowed to be jazz, and this is only allowed to be jazz. And by doing that, I believe you take away a lot of the power of a form of expression. I also believe that that's what he was just saying. The jazz tradition. No offense to this man that I'm about to speak about, because he seems like a relatively decent person at heart. Just as much of a product of the system that we're all in as anyone else. Even if he's tried to transcend it, I think he's only had but so much success. Although I don't know, because I haven't really talked to him about this. The local jazz legend, the local jazz guy, and in fact, most of the local jazz musicians in Charlottesville are all white. The place where I most heard jazz tradition was from the professor of jazz at UVA, John Dirth, who is, again, as far as I know, a very good person, and I know him personally. Like, I have had a person, more than a single personal interaction with the man. Enough that I felt comfortable developing an opinion about whether or not he was good. And yeah, I thought, seems like a really great guy. But when you look at this, I think this not just disconnect, but this juxtaposition is stark. There are a small handful of black jazz musicians in Charlottesville, from what I remember. And most of them, everybody knew, oh, you know, Jamal Milner is the guitarist, is the black guitarist. Gosh, I wish I could remember the name of the bass player, the drummer. There were two bass players, one drummer, and that was it for black jazz musicians in Charlottesville, as far as I knew. I mean, I'm sure there were more. I'm sure there were a lot more, but it really felt like a very white space. Jazz in Charlottesville felt very white, and might still. If you go to Miller's on a Thursday and you look around, I'm guessing you're gonna see more black faces on the staff than you are gonna see in the restaurant for the jazz performance. And this speaks to what I think of as sort of the performative nature of Charlottesville's anti-racism. I think of Charlottesville's engagement in these subjects to be largely performative. You know, and sometimes quite appropriative. You know, such as the majority of the jazz musicians in Charlottesville are white. It seems a bit like cultural appropriation now that we're learning about the history of jazz. The majority of the blues rock bands in Charlottesville are white. The majority of the blues players in Charlottesville are white. Charlottesville, by the way, has a huge music scene. Not a good one, because you're not getting out of that music scene. You know, if you remember the interview with Danny Byrne, talking about becoming famous outside of Charlottesville, not easy, you know. In any case, I feel like there is a bit of that, quite a bit of that, policing of personality in, especially in Charlotte. Well, I don't know about policing of personality, but there's a policing of, there's a gatekeeping to who gets to be called a jazz musician and who doesn't. And that gatekeeping, and what gets to be called jazz music and what doesn't. And that gatekeeping seems to be very much done by white people in a white supremacist attempt at undervaluing or devaluing black experience. Yeah. You know, under the most broad definitions of jazz, I make jazz music as well. Or we make jazz music here. We make, you know, some of the music we make is not in any sort of natural form. A lot of it isn't. A lot of it doesn't adhere to the shape, the normal shape of music. For instance, the song that you hear right now very quietly in the background called Comey Speaks. There's not really much repeating musical activity. A lot of the musical activity is evolving, it's not repeating. And the music exists to in the background enhance what Comey is saying in the foreground. Its structure as a song is not standard at all. It's way more of a jazz structure. But I don't think I would call what we do jazz. Partially because jazz wasn't the intention going in. Partially because by these sorts of definitions of jazz, that wasn't at all on my mind as we made that song. Although I guess it kind of was, because it was kind of protest music. It's kind of, so I don't know. It just, food for thought, I'm sure that there's more to this that I could be getting out of it if I were at all actually good at this. I want to remind people that this is not my forte at all. Reading comprehension, sure, I'm pretty good at that, but analytics, not so much. I tend to come up with, if I try too hard, I tend to come up with the wrong answers. Or find myself looking at the wrong things. And I suppose right and wrong is very subjective in this case. In school, though, you were supposed to analyze things in a specific way. You're supposed to get certain things out of the reading, and I apparently never read it the right way or got the right things out of the reading, according to my teachers. Some of my teachers in middle school and high school were not actually good at their jobs. Undervalued is an understatement when you look at the balance sheets of modern music industry and compare the percent of top streaming songs created by black artists to the percent of industry dollars black people actually control. And that is why here at Nikwork Entertainment, we have artist first policies. The creator gets paid. If there's enough left over after paying the creator for the company gets to keep some too. While cultural whiplash emerged as soon as the art form did, early critics of black American music were those who were most interested in maintaining and reproducing forms of white dominance. To most white Southerners, we gonna try that again. To most white Southerners, the seductive sounds that caused some of their own to break ranks indicated that a supernatural force was at play, so they called it devil's music. Thomas Edison, who famously hated black American music, also invented the phonograph, said it sounded better when he played the records backwards. Pope Pius XI chafing at the notion of black people emancipating themselves from mental chains of doctrine of discovery, spoke of the discordant cacophony and arrhythmic howls and wild cries of the new music. Black American music has its roots in black resistance, and its evolution was so nurtured by transgressive white participation, was also nurtured by. Back at the turn of the last century, the music created a place for encounter. Back at the turn of the last century, the music created a place for encounter in what the historian Richard Sudhalter sees as a tale of cooperation, mutual admiration, cross-fertilization, comings together and driftings apart, all despite rather than because of the segregation of the larger society. As adventurous white music lovers sought out the speakeasies and underground spaces where mixed groups of people could revel together in sweaty exchanges. Makes me want to Purell my hands a little. I guess post-COVID, we all have a new sort of set of reactions to that. And also, it might just be the way they describe and add sweaty. I feel like sweaty exchanges is just a bad set of words together. Like moist parts. Just shouldn't say these couple of words together because they just... Black American music was creating, through its relentless joy and insistence on breaking European musical and social conventions, an immeasurable force of liberation. Then and now, the music crossed borders of race and class, making it possible to imagine a new, more just social order, one that abolished constructed notions of race. I see how we are working our way back to borders and skin. And skin as a border. But the racial border patrol attempted to police the static hierarchies that the music upended. In the days of the early big band music, terrorist groups like the Ku Klux Klan threatened to tar and feather a band of black musicians just because we were playing for white people. Local cities and music venues tried to ban the music, ban mixed dancing, and enforced anti-miscegenation laws. They worked hard to reaffirm the binaries of black and white, master and slave, self and other. Hip-hop artists today experience the modern version of this policing quite literally. The New York Police Department had dedicated an entire unit called the Rap Intelligence Unit to gather information on performers, their entourages, performers and their entourages, coordinating their efforts with similar operations in Miami. The social borders that made colonial rule possible continue to exert their presence today. Luckily, music transcends borders. Our bodies are far richer than the fiction of race could ever contain. Are far richer than the fiction of race could ever contain. So, next chapter, endocrine system, building a new normal. This looks like it's going to be a little intense. Kind of looking forward to it, though. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to seeing what that sort of, what they mean, you know? But I think that's going to have to wait for next week, because we're getting close to the end of our time. Well, hour and 10, hour and 20, not that bad, but yeah, that is today's bit of the reading. I feel like that chapter needed more. I feel like the connective tissue, I feel like there's more to say there. I feel like there's a lot more to say there, but I don't know what it is. I know that there's a lot more to say about borders, about skin as a border, about self and other, and about self and concept of self, concept of other, and concept of similarity, concept of the concept of the question, is that creature similar enough to myself as a creature to fit into some constructed idea about identity. I feel like there are things that could have been said here that weren't. More stuff that needed talked about here than was. But I don't know. And unfortunately, I'm not a professional. I'm not actually, good at, as I was saying, that kind of analytic engagement. Yeah, something like that. You know, I mean, at least I try to engage with things, even if I'm, consistently getting the wrong thing out of it. At least I'm trying, right? Well, friends, thank you for being here. Yes, thank you for being here. Thank you, Just Me Crystal, for being here. Much love and appreciation always. And now's the time in the show when I say, don't forget to stick around for the raid, folks. Also, now is the time on the show when I say, as they say around here, 2 up, 2 down, VA, double deuces. We're out, y'all.
Upgrade your chatbot. ID10T. Press upgrade now. ID10T. Kick with an 808 kick, like an 8-bit kid, spin 8-bit love like that. Since the AOL chat, vampire room where you met me, got to know you on RRC, and I fell in love with the rhythm of your beat. It was geek love like nerds and he, and I celebrated like D035 when I knew that you like me too. And then we ride the information super high. Spent days in a haze and nights in a daze with you on the screen of the old Dell with the intel inside. You were jacked up on George and now everything like, how do you hide from the world queen like? What do the symbols in the cartouche mean like? What made lights in green? And I remember when you asked me, when I'm in sleep mode, do I dream? And I had you.